So I have this photograph of a brick wall, and I'm going to be explaining how to make a repeating background out of it. So when you're creating tile sets, you want to keep everything within the bounding box of a square. So what I'm going to do now is actually use the crop tool and crop out the square section that I want to use as my repeating texture. Alright, now that I have my canvas in a square, I can see that some of my bricks are actually not aligned straight. So what I'm going to do is actually go under View, Rulers, and then there's going to be rulers that appear around my workspace. And what I'm going to do is actually click on the rulers and then drag them down, and it'll create guidelines for me. Next, I'm actually going to click on the corner of my image, and I'm going to rotate it until the bricks align with the guides I made. Alright, so the edges of my image is actually starting to peek out, but that's totally fine because what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to scale my image up and I'm going to just move it around until the bricks look like they start and end the same way as best as I can. So the next step is offset, and that's actually incredibly important if you want your tiles to repeat seamlessly. So I'm making a duplicate of my original layer, and I'm actually going to explain to you how offset works with this new layer. At the top of your Photoshop menu, you're going to click on Filter, travel down to Other, and you're going to find Offset. And you're going to see that as I'm shifting the horizontal arrow to the left, the lines that I drew are also shifting to the left as well. So what Offset does is that it basically shifts the placement of my image around the canvas. And any part of my image that actually crossed over the edge of the canvas, it's going to be repeated back again on the opposite side. I'm using offset right now for my wall pattern. It actually looks like the bricks repeat perfectly from top to bottom. However, there's this obvious seam line here for the bricks lining up from side to side. And to fix this, I'm actually going to use the stamp tool. I'm going to hold down Alt and click on a section of the image that I don't have a problem with, and that's going to actually grab a copy of that. So the next thing I'm going to do is try to line up the bricks as best as I can, and then left click to stamp a copy of it on top. So another way to get rid of the seam lines is to select the part of the image you want to use to cover your seams. And then at the top, go under Select, Modify, and click on Feather. That way when you copy and paste your selection, there's going to be a feathered out border, so blending it in will be easier. So if you're making a group of things that you're going to repeat a lot together over and over again, you actually want everything in that group to look similar. Because once that group is repeated a lot, the differences actually stand out a lot more and it looks very unnatural. This is an example of what a sprite sheet might look like, and it holds a character's animations and poses that's going to be used throughout the game. The important thing about creating a sprite sheet is that you need the characters to be evenly spaced from each other. Because the way sprite animation works is that it's going to create a bounding box that the character can fit into and then divide the rest of the sprite sheet by those dimensions. Each section of the sprite sheet is now represented by a number. So a programmer could be like, I want pose number 3, and the character is actually going to transition from pose number 0 to pose number 3. So when I'm animating, I give myself a little bit of room first, and I like to make markings to give myself guidelines so I know where the floor is. That way my animation cycles will look more consistent. This background layer isn't going to be part of the animation at all. I'm just using this to help guide how I animate. So I'm actually going to lock it in, and then I'm going to go into Windows, Timeline, and it's going to open a timeline editor for animation and video. Right now my settings are set to 24 frames per second, which is how fast my animation is going to be played. 24 is usually the standard. You can go down to 12 if you want to make things easier, and also I'm pretty sure you can manually change the play speed of the animation in the game as well. For creating frame-by-frame animation, you actually need to use a different layer than what we normally use, and you're going to find it under Layers, Video Layer, and create New Blank Video Layer. So make sure your video layer is actually starting from 0 at the video editor timeline, and also that you're looking at frame 0. And I'm going to start drawing my guy here. And I'm actually going to create another guideline for me to know where his height is, so I can keep the rest of the frames consistent as well. I'm going to be making a walk cycle for him, so the next thing I need to do is click the button right next to the play button on the timeline, which is the next frame button, and it's going to open up the next frame for me. As you can see, the next frame is completely blank, and the difference between a video layer and a background layer is that in video layer, each frame actually stores its own information, so you can draw a new thing on each frame, but for a background layer, or I mean a normal layer, it's going to be the same completely throughout the whole timeline. So go to the top right-hand corner of the timeline window and click on the button over there, which is the timeline settings, and click Enable Onion Skins. So this will give you a preview of the frame behind the one you're currently working on right now, so you can see how you're animating. So while you're animating, you want to constantly move around your timeline to see how your frames are flowing together, and you can also press the play button to check how your frames are playing out. You can control what part of the timeline your animation starts and stops, and you can go back to the timeline settings and click Loop Playback, so whenever you hit play, it'll always constantly loop your animation. If you notice two of your frames don't transition correctly, what you can do is go on their layers, video layer, and insert new blank frame, and it'll insert a frame between the two before that you can add to. Once you're done with your animation cycle and you want to convert it into a sprite sheet, you need to hide your background first, and then go on their timeline settings, and now click on Convert Frames, Make Frames from Clips. And now each frame you drew is converted into a layer. One way you can use to create sprite sheets is to actually do it manually on Photoshop, where you increase the size of the canvas and use the grid system and guidelines to help you equally distribute each layer. The second way is to have Texture Packer downloaded and go under File, Export, and click on Layers to Files, and this will convert each individual layer to its own file. Create a folder where you're going to store all these animation files, and then hit Save. Once you have your folder with all your animation frames ready, all you have to do is drag and drop that folder onto Texture Packer. Have the algorithm settings set to basic, and it should have an evenly divided sprite sheet for you.